friends, welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I will be reading the Goodreads Choice Award winners in the fantasy romance category. This is the first year that they've done like a romantasy category all on its own and not just included it in fantasy or romance. And I am a fantasy romance girl. I love those two genres mixed together. It's my preferred. So I wanted to read some of the options that I hadn't read and just see how I feel about the state of the Goodreads awards. I have not been following the book internet choices or what everybody's been reading for the last like year and a half, so I was out of the loop with a lot of these reads, but I had read a decent amount of them. I had tried like the Jennifer L. Armentrout one. I had read Fourth Wing. Some of the options I had read, but the vast majority of them, 8, I had not. I did include some of the books that were parts of series that I hadn't read. I just read the first one, and others that were like deep into series I didn't read, especially if they're from an author that the series is very vast and the point that they won is quite far into the series. I don't necessarily agree with books in like later parts of the series being an award winner, but I understand from like a numbers perspective. All that is to say that in this video I read some of the Goodreads choice winners and have some mixed results. So let's just get right into that and see how I felt. So I am currently 41% of the way through The Foxglove King. I read this author's other work, the Red Riding Hood story, and I didn't even finish it. I wasn't a big fan. This one is marginally better. Honestly, if I wasn't reading it for this video, I probably also would have DNF'd, and partly I have the audiobook, so it's a little bit easier to read the story if I'm not really into it. Basically, this is about lore, and I didn't pick this up from the story. I must have missed it, but from the summary, from the description, we know that she was raised in a cult. She woke up outside of the catacombs of what I'm assuming is like the fiction version of Rome, and she was taken in by a woman who was running a criminal enterprise. She has death magic, she was born with it, and in this world there are people who can ingest poisons or go through a traumatic event to access death magic as well. This world was ruled by gods, but the backstory, to be honest, is not that important. The only time it really comes into play is when they're talking about the origins of death magic. One of the main characters is a monk, but religion and all of that and the gods, none of that really is important. She is running drugs, poison, for her mom, and she gets caught by the city guard. She gets taken to the church, and they tell her that if she uses her powers to figure out why people in outlying villages are just randomly dying, then they will pardon her for using this death magic. So she has a bodyguard named Gabriel, who is a monk, and then she is supposed to also at the same time be figuring out, like getting in the good graces of the crown prince, because his father and the church thinks that he is working with one of their enemy kingdoms for some reason. It sounds a lot more interesting than it is, especially now the plot has kind of settled down. She just awakened one of the children from one of the villages that had died to get information and like brought them back to life, and it didn't really glean that much information, and now she's kind of just doing like courtier things, going to balls, stuff like that. Not incredibly interesting. The writing is not character driven and not plot driven either, so it's sort of meandering and boring. I was originally intrigued by Gabriel because he is a duke. He was the duke's son of a village that basically burned to the ground, and so that's how he acquired his death magic, was through that injury. And he has some interesting relationships with the people in the court and specifically the crown prince. Now, the setup for this really seems like it's going to be a poly relationship, but I know that it's just ends up being a love triangle, which is unfortunate. So originally I was interested in the relationships between the three of them, but the crown prince is not that interesting. He kind of is just this playboy character, and we haven't really had that much interaction between them. They've had some like flirty moments, but it hasn't really been anything wild. And Gabriel is, I would say Gabriel and the Crown Prince's relationship is interesting. They have more of a connection, I feel like, than the heroine with either of the other guys. And I'm quickly losing interest in the story. I don't really feel like anything is fleshed out. Nothing feels very impactful. I don't really understand the world. We got a bunch of info about the world in the very beginning, and it hasn't really played a part since. I could and am continuing the story with no memory, really, of the setup, and it has no impact on my enjoyment of the story, because that's how little the backstory of this world plays a part in the story itself. The relationship is not interesting. There's no stakes, really. There's no tension in the story, so I'm just not very enthralled. Let's talk about Foxglove King, because I ended up finishing it. I have to be honest with you, I barely remember anything that happened in the beginning, and I probably eventually won't remember anything that happened at the end. I was not gripped by really any part of the story, and I'm not interested in the way the story is going. I'm not interested in the twist or continuing the series. So I think just in general, this author is going to be a miss for me. And then I ended up getting like 30% of the way through the Hurricane Wars. This is supposedly, allegedly, Raylo fanfiction. I'm not like a Raylo fan. Honestly, their two movies are like the worst in the trilogy, worst in the franchise in general. But I am liking the way that this book is set up. It's a very different point of view than we typically get. We open the story with our heroine, who is a fighter pilot for her army. They are at war with an army, with a kingdom that's like trying to take over every single country on this continent. The heroine has an ability that hasn't been seen in decades. The king of that kingdom, the bad kingdom, it's called the Night Empire, I think, the Night Empire. The king of the Night Empire eradicated all of her people, all of the people that could do her powers, all the people that had her powers, he killed them all. She has kept her powers a secret up to this point, but it's discovered during the beginning of the story, during a battle. She uses her powers to help save herself and also against the crown prince of that kingdom of the Night Empire. The general of her army tells her that their best bet is to go to a neighboring continent that's on the border of the Night Empire, and try to get them to be in an alliance with their kingdom. They've been trying for years, and the kingdom just has no interest in this war with the Night Empire, so they have avoided being allies. And she finds out that she's actually that kingdom's lost princess. We flash forward, I think it's a couple of months, and their kingdom has been decimated, and now the Night Empire has completely taken over. So, I am liking it. It's a very different point of view than we typically get. We don't usually get like a soldier's point of view as the heroine. It's usually like a human in a world of powers, human who has nothing to do with it, who's kind of just forced into these circumstances, or like a lost princess, which she is, but it's a little bit different. So, it's not the typical character, and that's interesting. And I do like the dynamic, because I think with a lot of fantasy romances, we end up, the heroine has her own opinions about the hero's kingdom if he's from another kingdom, and we find out that like his kingdom is actually not evil. She's been lied to her whole life, and I don't feel like that's going to be the case here. I'm interested to see how that dynamic plays out. Do know that a lot of people have complaints about this, which is very frustrating, because in my opinion, if you don't like romance in your fantasies, if you don't like fantasy romance, don't read fantasy romance. I don't know what you expect to get when you read it and then you go in and you leave these bad reviews. So I only have 12 hours left at 2 times speed, so I am optimistic that I'll be able to finish it soon, and then we'll move on to the next book. So I'm going to make this update very quick because, quite frankly, I don't have a lot to say, and also my camera battery is going to die at any second. But I managed to finish the Hurricane Wars a couple days ago. It was a 3-star. I definitely understand the people that really love this story, regardless of whether you're a Raylo fan or whatever. It is fun. It's interesting. It is a perspective that we don't often get, but I wasn't particularly drawn in. I didn't really love the romance. I think one of the things that people love so much about the Raylo dynamic is, specifically with Kylo Ren, the battle between good and evil in a person is interesting. It's an interesting dynamic, especially when a bad person is introduced to goodness, how that affects them. I didn't really get that from Alaric, who is the hero. He had this mentality of like, well, you need us, so just let it happen sort of situation. The other thing is the world. So the thing with fan fiction is a lot of the time you're writing characters that are pre-existing. They already have their own backstory, their own motivations, and you're just writing them in different scenarios, a different world, whatever, but everything is kind of understood to the reader already. So the effort put in is minimal in that way, and I definitely feel like that's where this failed. The effort put into the world and helping the reader ground themselves in the world was not really there. In addition to that, the pacing in the middle was really, really rough. We got a very quick, couple chapters in the very beginning introducing the war while it was happening, and then we have a bunch of time skips that don't help establish the world in any way. And I wish that the author had spent her page length on different things. I don't think it's a bad book by any means, and like I said, I understand people that absolutely adore it. I just couldn't get lost in it in the way that I wanted. Next up, I'm going to be listening to the assistant to the villain. I was not really on the bookternet much last year, and even I knew about this super popular fantasy romance when I hadn't even heard of some of these other books. I ended up picking this up sometime last year towards the end of the year, and I was listening to the audiobook of it. I got about 24% of the way through, and then I set it aside. It returned to my library, all that. And so when I picked it back up from my library, it resumed obviously where it was. First of all, the audiobook is just atrocious. I just was able to get the audiobook faster than I could get the ebook, but the audiobook is very bad. Unless it's been updated and re-uploaded and all of that, it's going to be a tough listen. But basically, the premise of the story is the heroine is looking for a job, and she gets a job with a villain in the area, kills people, he commits all of these crimes, and she's not really scared of him, which is not the usual reaction he gets, and she's just his assistant, and that's her job. It's fun, it's funny, it's a little bit corny, and I can't see it being a favorite, but it's not unenjoyable. It's a fun story, and it's quirky, and the premise is good. So I am 50% of the way through Assistant to the Villain, and I get people who have complaints, and there are a lot of people that have complaints, but I think this book is just very charming. It's fun, it's funny, it doesn't take itself too seriously, and I get people who really love it as well. I'm just really, really enjoying myself. The relationship dynamic between the hero and the heroine is a ton of fun. The hero is this broody, villainous character that, has all of these horrid stories about him. He tortures people, he does, bad things. And he very much revels in that. He loves that is his reputation. He wants everybody to have those feelings towards him. No one really knows his true identity, but that's kind of the personality that he portrays to the outside world. And the heroine is very bubbly and fun, but she has this like hidden malice within herself that the hero recognizes and connects with. And she's fiercely loyal to the villain. And she's like on board with whatever he wants to do. They're definitely, I would say, reluctant friends. They have an attraction for each other, but they haven't really acted on it. And it's just a ton of fun. And I love a romance where characters just know who they are. They're good with who they are. They like who they are. And they find someone that they can feel a kinship to and that they can see the hidden depths in each other. And it's not like as nuanced as all that is, really is just fun. But I think the author did a good job of writing characters that have a little bit more depth to them while keeping it fun and light. And you can sort of read into it as much as you want. You can come at it from just a fun, funny anti-hero, the villain of the story gets the girl sort of story, or you can kind of dig a little bit deeper, not too deep, a little bit deeper and read more into it. So I'm really liking it. It's going to be like a 4-star if I had to guess, even at this 50% mark. Like, it's just a good read. Not a good listen, though I am kind of past the bad quality of the audiobook at this point, and I'm just really liking it. And then I also got 13% of the way through Bewitched. I'm reading this as an ebook. I have read one other book by this author. I read Pestilence, which is the first book in her Four Horsemen series. I remember not really enjoying it. This one is about a witch who is trying to get into a coven, and they tell her that she has to complete 2 tasks to get accepted in. She has to go on like a wild adventure, and she has to find a familiar. So she books herself a adventure to somewhere, and she is on a plane, and this like weird blue magic shows up, and this being starts whispering in her ear. She doesn't know what's going on, but she tries to save the plane because she thinks the magic is trying to take the plane down. The plane crashes. When she comes to, she hears that voice again, and she follows it to this tomb. I've just gotten to the point where she opens the tomb and sees who I'm assuming is the hero, because we saw his point of view in the prologue. The writing is not as sophisticated, honestly, as I was expecting from Laura Thalassa. I don't remember it being this immature, I guess, with Pestilence. I hope that's who the author is of what I'm thinking about, but this is not great. The writing isn't terrible, but there are just some writing choices that I don't love. Overall, it's fun. Like, I'm 60 pages in and it's been breezy, but it's just not my favorite. It's an interesting story. The heroine doesn't have her memories. One of the things that her magic takes from her is her memories, which is kind of odd for magic. So she's kind of an odd witch out, I guess. And as far as we know, the hero has been locked in a tomb for some reason, and we don't know why. I'm assuming he might be Fae or something along those lines, because there's been mentions of the tomb looking like Fae stuff. We don't really know too terribly much about this world. There hasn't been a lot of world building. It seems like our world with like magical stuff, like Fae and stuff like that. Because she's like talking about getting on a plane, going to, the Galapagos Islands, like things like that. Just very real world stuff. But I'm not hating it. It's fine. So I'm probably going to try to finish Assistant to the Villain while I get some stuff done around the house today, and then we're gonna settle down and read Bewitched tonight. So we finished Bewitched. This book's a mess, and not in a good way, not in a fun way. I did not enjoy this. At first, the really disjointed and messy plotline was kind of fun. but by the end of it, I didn't really enjoy anything about the story. I gave it 2 stars. The characters had little to no depth at all, no description. I couldn't tell you a single thing about them as people, like what they don't like, what their motivation in life is. The hero pretty much didn't exist in the book until 60% of the way through. Their romance is not very believable. The school setting was pointless, and the heroine was a little too dumb to exist. I can't really like even give any good points about it. If you like this book, I love that for you, but this is not the kind of story that I enjoy, not the kind of writing. Nothing about this was fun for me. But I did end up getting 50% of the way through Throne of the Fallen, and shockingly, I am really enjoying it. I picked up the audiobook, which was a great decision because the audiobook is fantastic. The production is so good. The audiobook narrators are so good. This is a Regency romance, a Regency fantasy romance. I have tried to read 2 other things by this author. I believe it's her Stalking Jack the Ripper, which I didn't like, and the other one that I didn't like. But I am pleasantly surprised that I'm enjoying this. It's not really shocking because I didn't dislike her writing. I just was not a YA fan, and her new adult fell a little flat. So I will say her transition from a YA author to an adult author, while I enjoy that she kind of went up in age ranges until she got to adult, I'm very happy that she is with adult because so far I'm really liking this. As far as I know, this book is connected in worlds to her other new adult series, but I didn't really read that one, so I can't really tell you. I just read some reviews that said I didn't read this other book and I was fine, which, is also a plus, is always a plus. But this is basically about a woman who is an artist, and she also finds art for other people. The people in the ton enlist her help or employ her to find art for her. She has never been married. She's a spinster, and in the beginning of the book, she gets blackmailed by a guy who she sold a forgery art piece to that she forged. He found out that it was a forgery, and he's blackmailing her to work with him. At the same time, we have the hero who is a demon, I guess. He is the King of Envy or the Prince of Envy, something to do with envy. Game has started with all of the other demons and stuff, and he wants to win the game, and part of that game is to enlist her help in getting this portrait painted of this cursed object. He shows up at her townhouse, and she basically right off the bat rejects him, says, I know this is a cursed object, I have no interest in helping you, I'm not going to do it. But in order for him to compete and win the game, she has to do that. I guess the rules are different for every person because she hasn't been broached by anybody else. Or maybe to figure out the next clue, he has to do it for everybody else. I'm not really sure the semantics of it. But he decides that he's going to try to seduce her to get her to do what he wants. And pretty much right off the bat, their banter is fantastic. The hero is quite unexpectedly enchanted by her. He doesn't really understand why she, first of all, is not interested in him, why she has such an easy time kind of rejecting him, and then as he delves a little bit deeper into her personality, he's finding parts of her that he really likes. So I'm enjoying it so far. It's a lot of fun, and the audiobook experience is great. Okay, so let's talk about the last 2 books that I read for this video, and then we'll get into the DNFs, and I'll give some recommendations for some things that I think you might enjoy instead of reading the things on the Goodreads Choice Awards. So, first up, I finished the Fate Court of Flame and this K.A. Tucker book. I have not read anything else by K.A. Tucker, but I had heard fantastic things about her contemporary romance, and I wanted to give this one a shot. I was excited to be reading a book by an author that has like an established backlist, and I was hopeful that the writing style would at least be good. I was not wrong. I think the writing style was a lot more mature than some of these other books on the list, but that is the extent of what I enjoyed about this story. This is basically the story of a woman who gets transported by a witch to a fae fantasy world, and she has to help the king find out who is trying to kill him and his family. There's fae and vampires and all of that. Unfortunately, this suffered from the books where the heroine is locked in one room for the majority of the story. There involves minimal plot. All of the world building that we learn is through monologues from other people, and there is little to no romance that I was on board with. I don't know, it didn't work. I was struggling up to the 50% mark, but beyond that, it was not good. I really had a hard time getting through it, and like I said, the writing wasn't necessarily bad, but the execution of the story was not well done. I have read books where the heroine is stuck in one room or one house or whatever, and the author just executes it in a better way, in a way that is enjoyable to read. And there wasn't anything with the characters that I felt particularly drawn to that kind of relieved the lack of plot. So that was a 2-star. And then I ended up finishing Throne of the Fallen, and I'm honestly very pleasantly surprised about this one. So just to clarify, because I didn't do a very good job of explaining this previously, but the heroine is an art dealer and she creates art, and she is being blackmailed by a guy who is a member of the Ton. Then we have the hero, who is the Prince of Envy, like the 7 deadly sins, and in order for him to save his demon court, he needs the help of the heroine to draw and paint this cursed throne. There's a game that's been put in place by the Fae Seelie King, and if he doesn't participate and win, his court's going to die. She refuses to paint this thing because it's cursed, and she kind of has an idea. But through a series of events, they end up working together, and it's sort of like a very stereotypical quest storyline where they're going from place to place trying to find objects that they need in order to reach a mutual end. I really, really, really liked it. This has some of the strongest writing that I've read of all of the books in this little video. I loved the story. The romance is very compelling. I like this typical quest storyline when it comes to fantasy, and I was rooting for the relationship. It had all the components of the story that I really loved. The writing was fantastic. The atmosphere was well fleshed out and real, and the romance wasn't the most like enthralling and emotionally deep thing, but it was good for the type of story that I was reading, and I really, really liked it. I gave it 4 stars, and I would be more than happy to check out more from this author in her adult fantasy journey. I don't think I would check anything out YA. But yeah, that was probably the best book that I read for this. I really, really enjoyed Assistant to the Villain, but I liked this one more. So if you're going to take away from any of these, I would recommend picking this up. If you have loved Carrie Maniscalco in the past, or you haven't, I still would recommend giving this a shot. Particularly the audiobook is very, very good. So those are all the books that I'm going to read. So let's talk about the things that I DNF'd. And that is A Court So Lovely. This one right here. I got 50% in. I tried to read this book previously. It's basically about a woman who lives in a world where everybody is gifted one elemental magic. Previously everybody had elemental magic, and they were punished by gods, and now you can only tap into one. And you sacrifice your power to the gods as a show of faith when you're a child, and it's returned to you on your 25th birthday. And the heroine has abilities that she shouldn't really have, and so she is forced to go on the run or she'll be murdered. and she goes on the run, but she gets captured by a prince from another kingdom, and he needs her to, I don't know if he's a prince actually, I think he might just be like a commander in the army or something, but he needs her abilities to enact a plan, and so he kind of takes her hostage, but they kind of come to a reluctant deal. First of all, the book is very long for the feeling, the pace of the story. Like I said, I tried to read this previously and I found it to be very dull. I struggle a lot with a lot of fantasy romances, particularly on Kindle Unlimited, because they're either really exciting and really great and gripping, or they're dull, and unfortunately that fell into that category. There isn't anything necessarily inherently wrong with it. I didn't have any ill feelings towards it like I did for some of the books that were 2 stars. I just didn't feel like I wanted to continue the story, and I probably would have been a 3-star. And why I continued the others that were definitely 2-star instead of this one, I couldn't really tell you, but I just didn't want to get through the page length for the story that it was. Like, there was nothing that gripped me at all to continue. No, nothing, you know? So I just DNF'd it. And then I didn't even really make it that far into Trial of the Sun Queen, which is the first book. The second book is on this Goodreads list, but I decided to pick the first one up. This isn't really the sort of story that I like. This sort of like all bunch of women fighting for the affections of one guy, particularly like a prince or a king or something. Not my favorite. And there was just a lot of very heavy like sexual assault themes in the very beginning of this book, and with the combination of the plot not being something that I wanted to read, in addition to that, I just didn't want to read it. So if you enjoy it, I would love to know down below if you guys like it. Is it more like a selection? I have a feeling that's what it's kind of similar to. It's just not my cup of tea. But that being said, because I did not love or finish a lot of the books in this video, I wanted to give you guys some recommendations of some really good fantasy romances on Kindle Unlimited that I think you'll really enjoy and that I think you should check out. So if you liked the Hurricane Wars, or you were intrigued by the plot but you didn't really love the story, I would recommend that you check out The Viridian Priestess. This is a sci-fi romance that I read a while ago and I loved it. It's basically about a priestess who gets enlisted by her high priestess to complete a mission with a Mandalorian type character, and they have to travel from world to world to access these shards, to gain possession of these shards that are set to save them. And it's really interesting the way that she kind of like breaks down her religious indoctrination, and the romance is very sweet and very calm. The hero is a big grump, and the overall like character development throughout the series throughout the book is really good. It's more quiet and contemplative than, you know, some of the other more fast-paced stories might be, but I really enjoyed it. And then another recommendation is going to be Court of Blood and Bane, I think is what it's called. This is a Peaky Blinders inspired story, and there is alchemy and magic in this. It is an arranged marriage between the hero and the heroine. The hero is like supposed to be like the Tommy Shelby sort of character, and I loved this. It's full of a lot of like political machinations. It's full of mafia dealings and maneuverings. I loved the alchemy aspect and the fantasy aspect. It definitely has like the gritty, dark underworld feeling of Peaky Blinders, and it's a ton of fun. I love the found family trope, and it's just a really good book. That's like a solid 5-star that I am so thrilled to get to the second one. And then my last recommendation for you is going to be my most recent read, and something that you guys have probably heard of if you're in like the fantasy romance sphere anywhere, but that is When the Moon Hatched. I actually finished this right before starting this video, and this is a chunker. It's like, I believe it's over 700 pages. It is an amnesia story, so if you're not a fan, I wouldn't recommend picking this up because she doesn't know who she is, and that plays a huge part of this story. The heroine was taken in by a crime syndicate at an early age, and she is now an assassin for them. We start off the book with her killing someone and throwing their body off the cliff. And she is kind of the stoic, cold-hearted assassin female main character, and she has no powers, seemingly. She ends up getting taken by various groups of people until she ultimately lands in the hands of the hero. The hero is a mysterious character you don't really know the identity of, and I don't want to reveal it to you because that is part of the story, but it's exceptional. The writing is very flowery, and it borders on purple sometimes, but it's gorgeously written, and it takes the amnesia trope, which is something that I don't generally love, and turns it on its head in a really delightful way. It is extremely slow burn. The world feels fully fleshed out and something that the author has spent a lot of time and care crafting. It has dragons, magic, it has pretty much something for everybody, as long as you don't mind a heavy length book and a little bit of a slow pacing for the plot. So definitely check out those three if they sound at all interesting to you. I would highly recommend, and if you end up reading them, I would love to know what your thoughts are down below. Other than that, I would love to know what your thoughts are on any of the books that I read in this video. I know it wasn't super successful, but I do want to like books, so if you have some fantasy romance recommendations down below, what you think the Goodreads Choice Awards should have picked, I would love to know. I would love to add them to my TBR. Other than that, all of my socials are linked down below. Don't forget to subscribe if you are interested in more book content or vlogs. I do a plethora of things. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in my next one.